Oh, I'm live. What do you know? Um, I'm missing my rainbow frame. I need another good live stream frame. I watched the Dave Smith Andrew Wilson debate. I bet a lot of you did. For those of you who didn't, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But there was a debate between Dave Smith and Andrew Wilson last night. It was supposed to be about Christian populism versus libertarianism. So when I think about Christian populism, I think about some of the comments that Marjorie Taylor Greene has made, the general sort of desire from certain parts of the right wing to inject Christianity back into American politics. But the debate devolved into a debate about divine command and incest. Mostly thanks to Andrew Wilson's, debate tactic preferences. He likes to have these really aggressive debates. It came across as though he was really debating, really berating Dave on degenerate bunny trails, like this, fixation on talking about incest and trying to own libertarians on that. I saw Milo Yiannopoulos, spurting out on that after Donald Trump spoke at our national convention recently. But anyway, that's a thing I guess you can do in a debate. I also thought that he poorly articulated some Christian philosophical terms and just sort of used some word salads and terms that were ill-defined instead of sticking to the debate topic in a meaningful way. Using aggressive debate text, that's probably his thing that he's used to doing. So I don't even know that that's necessarily, a thing he did that was wrong. But usually when Dave Smith has debates, and he just totally owned Chris Cuomo recently, it has a more comfortable cadence. It seems more respectful. It seems a lot more like about a debate of ideas instead of just trying to own your opponent, drill down, get them to stumble over their words and mess up. So my preference is usually to watch debates in Dave's style. My biggest preference is Oxford style debates. That's what I'm familiar with, and that's what I'm known for doing through the Soho Forum. But whatever, there's all different kinds and styles of debates. It is what it is. So let's talk a little bit about the deontological argument that made my hair stand on end, to the point that I felt like I should talk about this a little bit. It was divine command versus natural law. These are deontological arguments, which is probably something that should have been introduced, I think, in the very beginning of the debate instead of just jamming right into that. These topics, by the way, if you're interested in these topics, you can find a really good explanation from a Christian perspective in this book right here. This is a book that I had in college. I went to Biola University. Really fantastic school. Well, back then, I don't know about now. It's probably gone woke like everything else. But yeah, really good explanation of those topics here. You can see I've got a lot of other really interesting Christian ethics and philosophical books as well. I don't talk about it as much, because I'm the chair of the Libertarian Party, and I just don't have an opportunity to dig into it as much. But that is totally my jam. So let's talk about divine command. That's something that Andrew Wilson brought up. Divine command is a system of ethics in which the ultimate foundation for morality is the revealed will of God, specifically like his commands found in Scripture, and also what he impresses upon the individual's heart. But really the emphasis is on Scripture. And, something he talked about was, like whatever God beams into my head, like his thoughts. I don't really think that's a very good definition of divine command. It's God's will as codified in the Bible. I got plenty of those lying around here, but you all know what that book is. There are some problems with divine command theory from a Christian perspective. Namely, how do we determine the nature of goodness? What is good? Does goodness come from God? Does goodness predate God? Like this, there's this whole thing with that. And what do we do when there's a seeming conflict between two different scriptures, between two of God's commands that seem to be, maybe in different places in time, but roughly regarding the same scenario? I think divine command is too rigid to address moral conflicts due to man's fallen sin nature and the fallen state of the world. If you are an atheist and you're watching this and your eyes are glazing over, I forgive you. Just hang along for the ride if you want, because I'm going to talk a little bit about natural law. All of this, by the way, is from a Christian perspective. I am a Christian. I don't usually talk a lot about Scripture. I'm very much in my libertarian wheelhouse. and very mindful of the public persona I have. But again, I did feel that this was worth addressing. So rigidity in divine command and moral conflicts. I'll pull one biblical analogy. Rahab in the Old Testament lies to protect the Israelites, spies. She lied. Lying is bad. You can look it up. Just go Google Rahab, Old Testament. Rahab, bad, right? But that's not actually how her actions were viewed in the context of the situation. She lied to protect someone. I don't think that divine command does a really good job of explaining these situations and sifting through, what seems to be like shifting moral sand. And you could call it subjectivism. I don't believe in subjective morals, by the way. I do believe that there is like a greater good scenario in most situations, and divine command just doesn't do a good job of explaining that. What else? Natural law. So really this argument was about natural law versus divine command. Unfortunately, we wanted to hear Christian populism versus libertarianism. Dave tried, I think, to wrench it back. Oh no, I froze. Well, let's just do this thing that I do where I fix this. I tried closing every browser window I had on this computer so that it wouldn't do that. Still doing it, so I don't know what the heck that's about. Natural law is a general, like objective and widely shared framework for discussing moral values. It's not tied to specific revelations of scripture. They're universal concepts of justice, and these all flow, from my perspective, from agency and free will arguments of varying kinds. One of the problems with natural law is that it is difficult to define. Clarence Thomas actually he came under heat back in the early 90s when he was talking about natural law publicly. I think maybe that was like his hearings to see if he was going to be confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. But yeah, that's really interesting. If you look up Clarence Thomas and natural law, you will see some of the and the freakouts that people have done over it. But those of you who are in the know, go to your favorite source on natural law, use your preferred interpretation. It is vague. That is one of its weaknesses. It is not anti-Christian though. Lot of Christian theologians, philosophers, ethicists all reference natural law. There's biblical basis for it. Romans 2, 1 through 16. I think it might be 14 through 16. Paul talks about natural law. He appeals to creation as evidence of natural law. And I think that's a really good argument for it. And I'll dig into that a little bit. There are also some limits to natural law from a Christian perspective, like the special revelation of salvation. That's not covered under natural law, I don't think. And, people could argue against it, but I'd say that's a limitation. The other thing that I'd say, it's a total conflation. It's a logical fallacy to say that divine command is in opposition to natural law. And I think that this is something that wasn't necessarily made or articulated in that argument. From my perspective, natural law flows from creation. It flows from God's creation. It flows out of divine command. Divine command is like an incomplete theory, and natural law from a Christian perspective is also an incomplete theory. So you can't just pit one against the other. They're interconnected. And if you're an atheist, again, that'll annoy you. But I said from a Christian perspective, natural law under the auspices of God's creation is a better philosophical undergirding for the understanding of the world than divine command. If you're looking at them just by themselves, because it explains how everything is upheld in nature and the world continues to work and we figure things out in spite of the fact that many people don't believe in divine command or God at all. I'd say natural law is superior. And this is where we start to sort of veer more into the discussion of libertarianism. Self-ownership was another thing that just got dragged in that debate. What is self-ownership? It's tied to agency. So no one without self-agency can own anything. I mean, you could write a contract, whatever, it doesn't, none of that has any bearing on someone's free will and their agency. God created us with free will, with the capacity to rebel. And that's why we have self-ownership. And I guess, you could also have this devolve into an argument about Calvinism if you wanted to, but let's not, we'll leave that for someone else. This is not a physical argument. It's not about, do I own a box? Do I own a chapstick? Do I own a Solo cup? It's about free will and agency. No one owns your psyche. This is a spiritual and philosophical argument. We went down this whole bunny trail on the debate on slavery. I don't think that adequately addressed the topic. You are the only person responsible for your actions, and that is what self-ownership is about. A really good place, I think, to understand the crux of this argument and critique it and pick it apart is the ending of the book, 1984. So I think everyone is familiar with 1984. If you are younger and you haven't read it, I highly recommend you go and read it. It's a thick, heavy read. It's really, really engaging, though. I don't think it's too dry and technical. And if you just are a person who hasn't read it, but you hate reading, go look through the spark notes of it. It's very worthwhile. In the end of the book, the protagonist is being tortured. Spoiler alert. He's being tortured. And he talks about how under duress, he implicated other people. He blamed his girlfriend. He blamed anyone and everyone. He gave up the information they wanted. But there's very different. It's very different to say things under duress while you're literally being tortured than to have it change in your heart. And I won't reveal what happens at the very end of the book, but what that really is a radical expression of self-ownership and free will. It's very different to say something because you're coerced. It's very different to be enslaved because you're coerced than to have an outside force, control your thoughts, or to be a meat computer, for those of you who don't believe in free will. And I think this is something that really cuts to the heart of self-ownership. And you do own yourself. And if you didn't, then God wouldn't have given you the capacity to have free will. And I think that most Christians would agree with me, unless you're Calvinist and you think that, God's will is irresistible and all of that. But free will is very important from a libertarian perspective. It's very important, I think. What else? Possession and lawful possession are totally different topics and areas of ethics and self-ownership, and I don't even think they belong in that debate. And the conflation of consequences and actions deserving of consequences, that happened. Consequences are not the same thing as responsibility, right? People who own themselves are responsible and accountable for their own actions, and that's more evidence of self-ownership. Just because there are consequences to your stupid actions doesn't mean that you lack self-ownership or that God owns you outright and no one else owns you. Everybody has to be responsible and accountable for their actions. That's part of free will. What was next? Why shouldn't the church be in charge? Why shouldn't we have a theocratic government if such a thing can exist? And I don't actually think that it can. Why shouldn't we have church and state together? I think from a Christian perspective, the reasoning behind this is extremely self-evident and evident to anyone who's read the Bible. And that's one of the reasons I think it's so weird that Christians hyperfixate on injecting the church back into the government. This is just really basic in the Old Testament. The Israelites pleaded with God to have a king, and God was like, you don't want that. It's a stupid thing. You're all going to shoot yourselves in the foot. It's a bad idea. And they're, oh, please give us a king. So he gives him a king. He's like, fine, you can have a king, but there's going to be consequences. Your choice. Again, he lets them have their choice. Saul is their king. He is a complete jerk. It goes south. The Pharisees later on, very legalistic, not in alignment with God. What else? Israel was a theocracy, but we don't live in a theocracy. When God was present in the Old Testament, he was literally right there. He was present in a cloud, in a pillar of fire. He wasn't, 2,000 years removed from the situation. It was just right there, Or then they were led by prophets. It's not the president of the United States plus the Pledge of Allegiance plus a bunch of Christian moral. A theocracy is so completely different from what we have. It would have no resemblance to our current United States government. or to any Western government. Christ didn't usher in a theocracy. He didn't use the law at all. Like, he was in opposition to the law. He was in defiance of the law. I think that's really important. New Testament ethics were not legalistic because they were not. Oh my gosh, this freezing is just so miserable. I'm so sorry. Let's fix it again. How do we fix it? I don't know. Got a new computer. Got new everything. Anyway, the moral teachings in the New Testament were for the church, not the government. Church, not the government. I can't stress that enough. Go look it up. Go read it. You'll find out I'm correct. With the coming of Christ, with God's people, the Gentiles in the New Testament, that's a whole nother argument, right? Those people were not under the Old Testament law, and they were not required to go back and obey every legalistic Old Testament law. And, I think that's a really significant thing that should be addressed when we talk about theocracy and legalism. What was the intent of Christ when he came? Very curious to hear your thoughts. We also had, a whole bunch of corrupting of our church institutions over the past 2,000 years. We had some ugly things happen in the Spanish Inquisition. I think also, in defense of people like, maybe I won't call them out by name, many of my Catholic friends who've written fantastic books about Catholicism and correcting the record. I think that many of the bad things done by the church were distorted and overblown by mean-spirited, dishonest, secular historians. Regardless of that, the Christian church has been corrupted many times, and it's usually done by human beings in positions of authority and power, which is why I believe that decentralization is a very good thing for the church, and why I think recognition of human free will is a very good thing for the church as well. But yeah, why would we want to usher that into government? We have a whole bunch of corrupt, fallen human beings who don't do a good job of governing, and thinking that we're going to just cram Christianity into that and then it's going to be okay is a very bad idea. Because we put lots of fine, upstanding Christians into government all the time. And they have scandals, they have sex scandals, they have same-sex prostitution scandals, they send our money overseas and use it that money goes to kill Christians in foreign countries. Hello, Israel and Gaza. We don't need a Christian theocracy. It's a bad idea. And God does not command that we have undying subservience and obedience to the state. There are many stories, many scenarios in biblical history where God sanctions rebellion against the state. Really simple one, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Go ahead and look that one up. There was rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar. There was rebellion. Open prayer was something that was done in rebellion. And then, divine command, people are going to have a problem with that because then, they'll look something else up in the Bible that says praying out in the open is a sin. So go and sort all of that out and try to figure it out. But, Jesus disobeyed the Pharisees and legalistic behavior all of the time. He healed someone on the Sabbath, came under fire for that. He did a whole lot of bad things. He got tortured by the government. Don't trust the government. You're not going to fix it. There's this whole but I can fix her attitude. We can make it a little better, but jamming Christianity into government is not going to fix it. It's a terrible idea. Let's talk about this weird argument, this weird fixation on incest, which I think is so cringe. And I think we're at a point where it's not cringe on libertarians because we don't keep bringing it up. It's you guys. It's hardline social conservatives, people who are trying to score points on us. Incest is gross. You don't need to try to persuade us of that. It's gross. You don't like that we're not heavy-handed about some of these moral issues with victimless crimes, drug use, prostitution, incest. I don't think any of it's good. I just don't think that government improves the situation. I just don't think it does. What is the argument against incest, by the way, outside of a biblical narrative? It represents the erosion of the edges of reality. It basically blurs and distorts the boundaries of the family unit, how we should act towards one another, It's profoundly dangerous and destructive to human flourishing. And God has built that discomfort into natural law. It is self-evident. Everyone knows that. You could make similar arguments about homosexuality. A lot of Christians do. Libertarians, it's a political framework, by the way. It's not a complete moral philosophy, which is a whole other thing that I think that the two have been conflated. It shouldn't be Christianity or libertarianism. From my perspective, it should be both together, each doing their part. But yeah, it's just because you remove laws against these things doesn't mean that there aren't community standards, built-in moral checks, biological checks. All of that stuff exists independent of the law, which is why people have been able to, generally get together without the government in their home, watching them, spying on every single action they do. People generally will self-govern as long as, things aren't, I guess that's a whole nother conversation, right? People will self-govern. We could talk about why they don't and what the incentives are and human nature and sin nature and all of that. But people do a better job of checking each other than government does. Government is incredibly violent. It's incredibly corrupt. There's a lot of awful people in it. There's a lot of horrible incentives for people in government. It's not a good system. Government is bad. Okay. Should we use government should we use government force to punish or exterminate degenerate behavior? No. And I think from a Christian perspective, we should mostly leave it to God. We leave victimless crimes to God because that's the safest way, I think, to safeguard against man's fallen sin nature and inclination to act in a tyrannical way towards his fellow man. And there are a lot of fascinating studies about this and all kinds of little anecdotes that you guys can look up. But I think that you know what I mean. Those of you who are Christians also know it. What else came up in that debate that just made my hair stand on end? Corporations did not monopolize industries until they lobbied the government for regulatory cover to do so. This is like a basic fee article, Mises.org short article. This whole thing about like government checking corporations and corporate power. It's completely wrong. This is libertarianism 101. I think that Dave did try to get this point in and he just got blah, 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 debate me bro argued over, which is annoying. I know that Dave knows that and he's very good at articulating that. And I think he mostly did so, except for when he was getting talked over. What about the draft? This did annoy me. No, God does not mandate that we obey man's immoral law. The Ukrainian government, for example, incredibly corrupt and degenerate, I might add, from the traditional conservative Christian perspective. Why would we obey a law that mandates us to go to war and kill people to defend and uphold degenerate, immoral government actions? That makes no sense to me. I don't know how any Christian could argue for this, especially over in Ukraine or here in the United States. Sure, here in the United States, we're going to be attacked by some government, and so your filthy, degenerate government is commanding that you, if you're a man, 18 to 45, you sign up and you go on the front lines. To defend what? The trans public school money, that whole thing. What else? Can you think of a whole bunch of things the government does that you find reprehensible and you don't agree with? I bet you can. Planned Parenthood funding? Go to war to defend Planned Parenthood, aborting babies? Yeah. It's just like a disingenuous argument. And I think that intelligent Christians know better. God doesn't command you to go kill people in Vietnam or Ukraine or bomb Christian churches in Gaza, blowing up Christian Orthodox churches with women and children. It's so disingenuous and dishonest. And I think everybody knows better. You all know better. So that's kind of how I feel about that debate. I think I rambled a little bit, probably less than the debate did. I think that Dave did a really good job of trying to defend us. And I wish that the conversation had actually been about Christian populism versus libertarianism instead of just a deontological argument with ill-defined terms and talking about transcendental values without explaining what that is to the average viewer. And people who have a lot of knowledge of terminology, if you want to be a successful communicator, you should talk about it in plain English. And I think that Dave wanted him to talk about it in plain English, and it just didn't happen. And it devolved into Andrew Wilson kind of berating him and Dave being like, hey, like, do you want to have a conversation? And Andrew Wilson being like, now's my chance to score points. Oh, I am having a conversation. Answer my question. Answer my question. And Dave not really, biting the apple. So it was extremely frustrating. But yeah, natural law is great. And we should support those arguments. And we shouldn't devolve into, like a Pepe meme or someone who just says, because God told you to, because God told you to, because it's wholly unpersuasive and it's not even how God works in his own creation. Burn. So thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Hopefully Andrew Wilson will do a better job arguing on behalf of Christianity in the future, but not a better job of arguing on behalf of Christian populism, because Christian populism does not belong in government. Libertarianism is much better.